On the morning of August 15, 1990, as the eastern region of Sri Lanka trembled under fear and uncertainty, a red Vespa scooter moved steadily along a dangerous road, carrying an American priest and a young Tamil boy toward a moment that would erase them from sight but not from memory. This was not a random journey or a careless decision. It was the final step in a life shaped by faith, courage, and unbreakable belief that standing with the vulnerable was more important than personal safety. Welcome to Hidden Truth, the channel where forgotten stories are not allowed to fade, where silence is questioned, and where history is explored with honesty, depth, and respect. Today we bring you the fully documented story of Father Eugene John Hebert, an American-born Jesuit missionary who disappeared during the Sri Lankan Civil War while protecting civilians trapped between armed forces and ethnic hatred. He was not a fighter, and he was not a politician. Yet his voice became dangerous because he chose truth over comfort and justice over silence. In a land where fear controlled roads, where people vanished without explanation, and where denial replaced accountability, Father Hebert stood firm and visible. What truly happened on the road between �W𝐢𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬 and Batticaloa? Why did official explanations collapse under scrutiny? And why does this case still remain unresolved decades later despite international attention and documented concern? This is not only the story of a man who disappeared, it is the story of how moral courage threatens systems built on fear. If you believe the truth should never be buried, if you believe forgotten lives deserve to be remembered, then subscribe to Hidden Truth now, because every subscription strengthens our mission to uncover stories powerful forces tried to erase. Stay with us, because this journey begins with faith and ends with a question that still demands an answer. Eugene John Hebert was born on October 9, 1923, in the small town of Jennings, Louisiana, a peaceful American community where life followed familiar rhythms and danger felt distant. His early life was shaped by strong family values that emphasized his discipline, honesty, and responsibility, qualities that formed a moral foundation long before he faced the challenges of conflict zones. From childhood, Eugene was known for his quiet reflection and sensitivity toward others, traits that set him apart and hinted at the path he would later choose. At 17 years old, on August 14, 1941, he made a life-changing decision by joining the Society of Jesus, committing himself to a demanding path of faith, learning, and service. The Jesuit formation process was rigorous and uncompromising, requiring years of intellectual discipline, spiritual development, and obedience, all designed to prepare individuals for leadership in difficult and often dangerous environments. Those who trained alongside Eugene later described him as calm under pressure, deeply sincere, and unwavering in his belief that faith must be lived through action. After completing his Jesuit studies, Eugene volunteered for overseas missionary work, a choice that required leaving behind familiarity, comfort, and the safety of his homeland. He selected Sri Lanka, then known as Ceylon, a country of extraordinary cultural richness but also deepening ethnic and political tensions. When Eugene arrived in September 1948, he entered a society marked by diversity and unresolved grievances that quietly shaped daily life. His first assignments placed him in Batticaloa and Trincomalee, eastern towns that would later become epicenters of the Civil War. Rather than remaining distant as a foreign missionary, Eugene immersed himself fully in local communities, learning languages, customs, and the lived realities of the people he served. Students and families remembered him as approachable and fair, a teacher who listened carefully and treated every individual with dignity, regardless of background. During these early years, Eugene developed a deep understanding of how poverty, inequality, and political neglect contributed to unrest and suffering. After 2 years of service, he traveled to Pune, India, to study theology, continuing the long Jesuit journey toward priesthood. This period of study deepened his understanding of moral responsibility and strengthened his belief that faith demanded engagement with human suffering rather than distance from it. On March 24, 1954, Eugene John Hebert was ordained as a priest, formally dedicating his life to spiritual leadership and social responsibility. For Eugene, priesthood was not a position of authority, but a commitment to walk beside those who struggled. He returned to Sri Lanka in April 1956 and was assigned to St. Joseph College in Trincomalee, where he would serve for more than 20 years. As a teacher, Eugene emphasized discipline, honesty, and critical thinking, believing education was a powerful defense against fear and manipulation. He was also deeply involved in sports, especially basketball, using the court as a space to teach teamwork, self-respect, and resilience. Students from Tamil, Muslim, and Sinhalese backgrounds trained together under his guidance, forming bonds that crossed ethnic and religious divisions. For a brief period, Eugene served as principal of St. Joseph College, earning respect for balanced leadership and fairness. The 1960s marked a turning point when the Sri Lankan government took control of private schools, including Catholic institutions, fundamentally changing the education system. This decision forced many missionaries into new roles, and Eugene was reassigned to Batticaloa. There he worked at the Eastern Technical Institute, a joint Jesuit and Methodist institution focused on vocational education and skill development. He later became director of the institute, placing him in a position of responsibility during a period of growing political instability. As director, Eugene was responsible not only for academic leadership, but also for student safety in an environment increasingly shaped by fear. Outside the institute, armed groups and security forces became a common presence, and civilian life grew more uncertain with each passing year. From 1978 to 1990, Eugene also served as basketball coach at St. Michael College in Batticaloa, where his teams achieved national championship status. While trophies were celebrated, the region beyond the school grounds was experiencing rising violence and deepening divisions. As the Sri Lankan civil war intensified, Batticaloa became a place of disappearances, checkpoints, and constant anxiety. Families searched desperately for loved ones who vanished without explanation, while official responses were often delayed, vague, or absent. Eugene John Hebert refused to accept this silence as normal. He became a prominent member of the Batticaloa Peace Committee, an organization dedicated to documenting disappearances and advocating for civilians. Through this committee, Eugene engaged with Sri Lankan government officials and the liberation tigers of Tamil Eelam, pressing for accountability and protection of non-combatants. This role placed him in a dangerous position, as speaking for civilians challenged both state authority and armed groups. Eugene listened patiently to grieving families, recorded testimonies, and personally intervened in tense situations where lives were at risk. He believed that faith without courage was empty, and that silence allowed injustice to thrive. As violence escalated in the late 1980s, his work became more visible and more dangerous. Despite warnings and growing threats, Eugene refused to abandon the people he served. Every decision he made reflected a belief that moral responsibility outweighed personal safety. Unknowingly, each step he took toward justice was guiding him toward a final journey that would define his legacy forever. By the late 1970s and throughout the 1980s, Sri Lanka was steadily descending into a conflict that reshaped daily life, especially in the eastern regions where ethnic diversity and political tension collided. Batticaloa, once known for its coastal calm and cultural coexistence, became a place where fear settled into routine and uncertainty followed every movement. The Sri Lankan civil war intensified as armed confrontations between government forces and the liberation tigers of Tamil Eelam spread across towns and villages. Civilians found themselves trapped between competing powers, each side demanding loyalty and punishing suspicion. Checkpoints appeared along roads, patrols increased, and ordinary travel became an act of risk. For Tamil communities, fear of disappearance became constant, while Muslim communities faced retaliatory violence and suspicion. In this climate, silence became a survival strategy for many. But for Father Eugene John Hebert, silence felt like betrayal. Through his work at the Eastern Technical Institute and his involvement with schools, he witnessed firsthand the psychological toll of conflict on students and families. Young people arrived at classrooms exhausted, fearful, and distracted by the sound of gunfire and rumors of killings. Parents approached him quietly, asking if he had heard anything about sons, brothers, or neighbors who had not returned home. Many disappearances were never acknowledged officially, leaving families suspended between hope and grief. Father Hebert began documenting these cases, recording names, dates, and circumstances whenever possible. This effort drew him deeper into the work of the Batticaloa Peace Committee, which sought to act as a bridge between civilians and those in power. The committee attempted to engage both Sri Lankan government officials and representatives of the liberation tigers of Tamil Eelam, demanding information about missing persons. Such actions were dangerous because they challenged the authority of armed actors who relied on fear and confusion to maintain control. Father Hebert understood the risks, but believed that faith demanded engagement rather than withdrawal. As violence escalated, rumors spread about individuals being targeted for speaking out, and warnings circulated quietly among activists. Despite this, Father Hebert continued traveling between communities, schools, and camps, maintaining visibility when many chose to hide. The year 1990 marked a turning point in brutality, especially in the eastern province. In August of that year, a series of massacres and counter-massacres erupted, targeting both Muslim and Tamil civilians. One of the most shocking events was the massacre at the 𝐂𝐇𝐏𝐏 Mosque, where Muslim worshippers were killed while praying. This atrocity sent shockwaves through the region and ignited retaliatory violence. In nearby 𝐌𝐢𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬, an ethnically mixed town, tensions reached a breaking point. Unruly mobs roamed the streets, and Tamil residents feared collective punishment. Reports emerged of Tamils being killed by groups seeking revenge, further deepening communal hatred. As panic spread, most Tamil residents fled 𝐌𝐢𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬, seeking safety in refugee camps in Batticaloa. However, not everyone was able to escape. A group of Catholic sisters, young girls, and helpers became trapped inside a convent, unable to leave due to surrounding violence. Their situation became urgent, as the risk of attack increased with each passing hour. The Bishop of Batticaloa was informed of the danger and decided to act. On August 13, 1990, Father Eugene John Hebert was sent to 𝐌𝐢𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬 to assist the trapped group and provide reassurance through his presence. His role was not military or political, but symbolic and practical, representing protection through visibility and moral authority. Father Hebert arrived and remained with the group, monitoring the situation closely. 2 days later, on August 15th, the bishop organized a security convoy from Batticaloa to retrieve the sisters and others safely. Father Hebert was instructed to return with the convoy on its way back to Batticaloa. At that moment, reports suggested that the situation in 𝐌𝐢𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬 was beginning to stabilize. Believing that his presence was no longer urgently required there, Father Hebert made a decision that would become critical. He informed the bishop that he would return independently, choosing a longer route through the town of 𝐅𝐴𝐴𝐻. He explained that urgent matters awaited him at the Eastern Technical Institute, where students and staff depended on his leadership. This route passed through an ethnically mixed area where tensions remained high, but movement appeared possible. Father Hebert was accompanied by a young Tamil boy named Batticaloa Francis, who served as his driver. They traveled together on a red Vespa scooter, a simple and familiar sight in the region. Witnesses later reported seeing the pair riding toward Batticaloa through 𝐅𝐴𝐴𝐻. At the time, nothing about their journey appeared unusual, yet danger surrounded them invisibly. 𝐅𝐴𝐴𝐻 was known to be unstable, with reports of looting, armed presence, and uncontrolled violence. Off-duty soldiers, local mobs, and criminal elements were said to be active in the area during those days. Despite this, Father Hebert chose not to turn back, trusting his understanding of the region and his commitment to duty. This decision reflected his lifelong pattern of prioritizing responsibility over fear. After that sighting, Father Eugene John Hebert and Batticaloa Francis were never seen again. Hours passed, then days, and concern turned into alarm. Searches were limited and information scarce. Official statements began to emerge, but they lacked clarity and consistency. As uncertainty spread, the disappearance of Father Hebert became another wound in a region already overwhelmed by loss. What followed would expose contradictions, denials, and testimonies that refused to fade. When Father Eugene John Hebert and Batticaloa Francis failed to return to Batticaloa on August 15, 1990, concerns spread quickly among colleagues, students, and church officials who understood the dangers of the region. At first, there was hope that delays or temporary detention explained their absence, a common occurrence during times of heightened security and unrest. As hours passed without word, that hope began to fade into fear. By the following day, anxiety had turned into alarm, as no reliable information surfaced about their whereabouts. Local priests, staff from the Eastern Technical Institute, and members of the Batticaloa Peace Committee began asking questions quietly, aware that public pressure could provoke retaliation. Despite the seriousness of the situation, there was no immediate large-scale search effort visible on the ground. Roads that Father Hebert was believed to have traveled remained uncontrolled, and potential witnesses were not systematically interviewed. Families familiar with enforced disappearances recognized the pattern with dread, because silence often signaled a permanent loss. Soon, official explanations began to circulate, but they lacked consistency and credibility. The Sri Lankan government informed the local American embassy that Father Hebert had likely been killed by the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, who were active in the 𝐅𝐴𝐴𝐻 area at the time. This claim was presented without physical evidence, eyewitness confirmation, or a clear account of events. For many who knew Father Hebert and the realities of the region, this explanation raised immediate doubts. Father Harry Miller, a fellow Jesuit who had worked closely with Eugene and had accompanied him from New Orleans decades earlier, publicly challenged the official narrative. He stated clearly that claims of an exhaustive search were false and that no meaningful investigation had taken place. He also rejected allegations that Father Hebert had fallen out of favor with the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, stating that there was no evidence to support such accusations. Instead, Father Miller pointed to an alternative and deeply troubling possibility, according to his understanding of the situation. Off-duty army personnel and looters were active in Erebor on the day of the disappearance. This environment of lawlessness created conditions where violence could occur without accountability. Supporting this account, another Catholic priest based in 𝐌𝐢𝐬𝐬𝐢𝐬𝐬 village in Trincomalee shared a testimony that added a painful human dimension to the case. This priest recounted information he received from a Muslim lorry owner who claimed to have knowledge of what happened. According to this testimony, Father Hebert and Bertram Francis were intercepted while traveling. The young Tamil boy was taken away and beaten to death, while Father Hebert was told he was free to leave. What happened next revealed the depth of Father Hebert's character. He refused to abandon the boy, choosing solidarity over safety. According to the same account, 3 days later, Father Eugene John Hebert was also killed. This testimony could not be officially verified, yet it aligned with patterns of violence reported widely during that period. It also explained why no bodies were recovered and no evidence remained. For families of the disappeared, such stories were tragically familiar, as destruction of evidence was common during the Civil War. As conflicting narratives emerged, uncertainty deepened. The Sri Lankan government maintained its position, continuing to place responsibility on the liberation tigers of Tamil Eelam. However, no arrests were made, and no transparent investigation followed. International attention grew slowly. Amnesty International issued a report in 1990 urging the Sri Lankan government to continue investigations into the disappearance of Father Hebert. The report noted that inquiries conducted by local military authorities were inconclusive and inadequate. Despite this call, progress remained minimal. Within Sri Lanka, fear prevented many potential witnesses from speaking openly. In communities like Erebor, people understood that silence often meant survival. For the Jesuit community, doubt about Father Hebert's fate did not exist. They believed with certainty that he and Bertram Francis were dead as a result of foul play. What remained unresolved was who bore responsibility and why truth had been buried. Father Hebert's disappearance became symbolic of the thousands of civilians who vanished during the war. His case stood out not because it was unique, but because it was documented, international, and still ignored. For students at St. Michael College and the Eastern Technical Institute, his absence was deeply personal. A teacher, coach, and protector was suddenly gone, leaving unanswered questions and silent classrooms. Families who had sought his help for missing relatives felt a renewed sense of abandonment. The message was clear and terrifying, that even those who spoke for justice could disappear without consequence. Yet Father Hebert's story did not end with silence. It continued in reports, testimonies, and memories that refused to fade. Every denial added weight to the suspicion that truth itself was the real victim. As years passed, his name joined the list of clergy, activists, and civilians who vanished during the conflict. But unlike many others, his story remained documented and remembered. This refusal to disappear completely became its own form of resistance. The road between 𝐌𝐢𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬 and Batticaloa remained unchanged, but what happened there continued to haunt those who knew the truth was incomplete. What followed would determine how history judged silence, courage, and accountability. In the years following the disappearance of Father Eugene John Hebert, silence surrounded the official record, but memory remained active among those who had known his work and his character. In Batticaloa, students, teachers, clergy, and ordinary families spoke his name quietly, not as a rumor, but as a reminder of a man who had stood beside them when few others would. For many civilians, his disappearance confirmed a harsh reality, that even international attention and religious standing could not protect someone who challenged injustice during the war. Within the Jesuit community, grief turned into determination, as fellow priests refused to allow Father Hebert's story to fade into obscurity. They remembered him not as a victim of circumstance, but as a person who knowingly accepted risk in defense of others. Accounts of his life emphasized consistency rather than heroics, highlighting how his final choices reflected values he had lived by for decades. At St. Michael College in Batticaloa, former students recalled a coach who demanded discipline while offering protection and encouragement. On the basketball court, he had taught teamwork and respect, but outside it, he had taught courage through example. Students remembered how he listened when fear overwhelmed them, and how he refused to dismiss their concerns as imaginary. For families of the disappeared, Father Hebert's absence carried a painful irony, because the man who helped them search for answers had himself vanished without resolution. Some families described his disappearance as proof that truth-telling itself had become a threat. In church communities across eastern Sri Lanka, his name began to be spoken with reverence, not because of how he died, but because of how he lived. Writings by Jesuit authors and human rights advocates described him as a martyr for justice, a term used not lightly but with careful reflection. They argued that martyrdom did not require public execution, but could also be found in quiet refusal to abandon moral responsibility. In this understanding, Father Hebert's refusal to leave Batticaloa Francis behind became central to his legacy. That moment, whether witnessed or reconstructed through testimony, symbolized a lifetime of choices guided by solidarity. As years passed, international attention resurfaced periodically, often prompted by anniversaries of his disappearance or renewed discussions of wartime accountability. Human rights organizations continued to list his case among unresolved disappearances, noting the absence of transparent investigation. Despite changes in political leadership, no new official inquiry provided clarity or closure. This lack of resolution deepened suspicion that truth had been deliberately avoided. For the Sri Lankan government, reopening such cases risked exposing broader patterns of abuse during the civil war. For many citizens, the silence confirmed that justice remained selective. Within academic and religious circles, Father Hebert's story became a case study in moral courage under authoritarian pressure. His life was examined not only for what it revealed about Sri Lanka, but for what it revealed about the cost of ethical consistency. Jesuit publications emphasized that his commitment to human rights was not separate from his faith, but a direct expression of it. They pointed out that his actions were not driven by ideology, but by personal relationships with those who suffered. He knew the names, faces, and stories of people who disappeared, and this knowledge made neutrality impossible. In this way, his disappearance became part of a larger narrative about the Sri Lankan Civil War, one defined by loss, denial, and unresolved trauma. For younger generations who learned about the war through fragmented accounts, Father Hebert's story offered a human entry point into history. It showed how global conflicts are experienced locally and personally through decisions made by individuals. It also demonstrated how moral choices often carry consequences that institutions are unwilling to acknowledge. Even decades later, the road between 𝐌𝐢𝐬𝐬𝐬𝐬 and Batticaloa remained ordinary in appearance, yet extraordinary in meaning. For those who knew the story, it marked a boundary between courage and silence. Father Hebert's legacy persisted not through monuments, but through memory and documentation. Reports, articles, and testimonies continued to circulate, ensuring that his name remained linked to questions of accountability. His story challenged listeners to consider what they would risk for truth. It asked whether justice could survive without witnesses willing to speak, and it reminded the world that some disappearances are meant to erase not only people, but principles. Yet in refusing to be forgotten, Father Eugene John Hebert transformed disappearance into remembrance. His life and loss became a quiet indictment of systems that rely on fear to maintain control. In that sense, his legacy did not end on August 15, 1990. It continued wherever truth was defended despite danger. The story you have just heard is not speculation, rumor, or fiction. It is supported by documented sources that confirm the life, work, disappearance, and unresolved investigation surrounding Father Eugene John Hebert and Batticaloa Francis. Primary documentation includes the historical biography of Eugene John Hebert recorded on Wikipedia, which details his birth in Jennings, Louisiana, his Jesuit service, and his disappearance on August 15, 1990. Amnesty International issued a formal report in 1990 urging the Sri Lankan government to continue investigations into the disappearance of Father Eugene Hebert and Batticaloa Francis, noting that military inquiries were inconclusive. America magazine published a detailed article titled "The Louisiana Jesuit Who Fought for Truth and Justice in War-Torn Sri Lanka," which examined his human rights work and the contradictions surrounding official explanations. 𝐔𝐿𝐼𝐬𝐬𝐢𝐬𝐬𝐬 published investigative accounts including the disappearance of Father Basketball in Batticaloa, documenting testimonies and alternative explanations. Sangam.org archived "Remembering a Martyr Who Died in the Defense of Justice," presenting Jesuit reflections and eyewitness context. Jesuit Archives published "A Faith That Does Justice," affirming the belief that Father Hebert was killed due to foul play while defending civilians. Together, these sources confirm that Father Eugene John Hebert was real, his work was documented, his disappearance occurred during a verified period of mass violence, and his case remains unresolved. This matters because history is not only written by those in power, but also preserved by those who refuse to forget. Father Hebert did not carry a weapon, yet he challenged fear by standing with civilians when silence was safer. He did not disappear because he was careless, he disappeared because he was consistent. His refusal to abandon Bertram Francis symbolized a lifetime of choosing people over protection. When systems fail to deliver justice, memory becomes resistance. When truth is denied, documentation becomes accountability. And when stories are forgotten, injustice wins. If this story moved you, challenged you, or made you question what courage truly looks like, then this is exactly why Hidden Truth exists. This channel is built to uncover real stories that powerful forces tried to erase. Every subscription strengthens our ability to research deeper, speak louder, and preserve the truth for future generations. If you believe that forgotten lives deserve to be remembered, if you believe truth should never disappear, then subscribe to Hidden Truth right now. Because silence protects injustice, but truth survives when people choose to listen.